Thank you for coming on an early Saturday morning, especially when there's free coffee and food next door. That's what I'm competing with. So this is going to be fun. I really appreciate that. My name is Cigdem Lule, and I have founded my own company almost 2 years ago on consulting and education and mineral appraisal and so on. But one of the things that I've been involved in gemology in a much more specialized area is color. And I worked with Richard Drucker and Tom Tashi for about 5 years on the World of Color system. Then now I am consulting with a color codex system that was just launched 2 days ago. And both are aimed to be serving the gem industry for color grading. That meant almost 7 years of getting involved in color. And it's fun, it's colorful, but I always make this joke. You don't need drugs to get psychedelic. You can get into all sorts of color research and your head might start spinning. In the meantime, I have a personality because of my science background that I like to see things, observe things, but also I'd like to know why they are happening and how they are happening. And I have a great interest in history, archaeology, and anthropology, so I thought, since color is something that we see and understand, and there is a perception of it, so how do we perceive color as human beings? What are the cultural connections? Then why it is and how it is applied to gemology? So that's the reason I got really excited about this talk. And this was something that I searched, and it's a free-form thing. There will be nothing scientific or dictating anything. It's all about my thoughts, and any comments are more than welcome. So one of the beautiful things about color and our industry, because this is going to be all about colored gemstones, by the way. I'm not going into diamond area. That's more of a business thing. And I'm more involved in colored stone part of the business anyway. We have wonderful colors and gemstones in this business that we look at all the time. This is just a small example. Sapphires, you have almost every color there that you can see and work with, and they're all natural. Yes, we know about treatments, but I'm not going. They exist in nature, therefore they can be treated to those colors. So that's what we have. Now, but color is in our lives. I mean, this is a nice, colorful table when you are relaxing, having a cup of coffee and, looking at colors. And this is something that really intrigues me, because when you go to different countries, and I travel a lot for work, different countries and meet with different cultures, colors change. Depending on where you are, what climate you are, what environment you are. We have the perception of business colors versus party colors, and what cultures consider certain colors lucky versus unlucky, that there are things like that. So it always intrigued me. And it cannot be something new. It should be in our DNA. That's how I look at it. Because to me, gems are in our DNA. We believe in that or think in terms of value when we look at them. Even if we're not in gem business or even remotely related to it, we have a look at them and think that they are something valuable. So color should be the same. In fact, it should be even much earlier than that, because human race, the existence of them goes as far as 2 million years ago. So, and there are evidence of obviously pigment production going very, very early. And all those pigment productions are whatever available was in nature. So there was obviously white through chalk. There was red through ochre, which is basically hematite mixed with whatever oil they could get. And because ochre could be diluted with the other materials like clay, it could be yellow, it could be orange, it could be red. And if you look at very early cave paintings, you will see lots of red paintings on them. It's all natural pigments that they are made. And when I was searching for color, I also found out that there are dyes and there are pigments. Dyes are generally from plants, and they are liquid, and pigments are from minerals, which is another intriguing point because we know how minerals were used as pigments. Later in our history, everybody knows about lapis lazuli being the ultramarine, meaning it's not ultramarine, it's because it's a beautiful blue. It's actually, the meaning of it is beyond sea because it refers to how far it comes from. And then there is another blue that apparently considered to be Armenian blue was from azurite. So it was a little bit more greenish. And lots of colors that you see in older paintings. Now let's move on to a little bit more onto medieval paintings, for example, were all natural pigments, not dyes, because dyes were liquid and they could fade away, and they were used for fabric more than anything else in textile, but the pigments were used for paintings and especially for miniatures. So how did it all come and get exchanged? You know, lapis lazuli, the major source, is in Afghanistan. And how do we see it everywhere? Lapis lazuli didn't come to Europe as a pigment in the Middle Ages. It actually came all the way from Afghanistan to ancient Egypt. And it was used as a gemstone, but if you look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and then certain paintings in their tombs, you will find lots of coloring pigments that are used, and lapis is one of them because it was ground and then used with the blue color. So what we see here is actually the trade, ancient trade. And the most valuable commodities in ancient trade was spices. So there's a lot of connection between spice trades and gem and pigment trade. Whatever could be carried and not perishable was traded. And how did that happen? Well, we know about silk, for example. What does that remind you? Silk Road. And Silk Road has existed for over 3,000 years and extended over 6,000 miles. It was all done connecting all these dots, as you can see, all the way from Far East, going through different places on land. Red is from the land, and the rest of it was sea roads. We're not talking about seafarers now. In the 15th, 16th century, there were lots of sea trade, but because they could go to bigger seas. But this is more of a earlier thing. That this goes beyond much earlier than ancient Rome, for example, Hellenistic times and so on. The ancient Greeks knew about it, and one of the things was so important and expensive was spices. For example, there was a time in history that black pepper corns were more valuable than gold. So you can imagine all the spices and all the material that could be used as pigments and dyes were quite valuable too. So we're looking at something important. Now, I love this miniature. This is a 13th century miniature. It's in Paris Museum. And as I mentioned, about 6,000 miles and 3,000 years of trade. And this is a miniature about Arab traders. Those big groups of trading, that what they used to call as caravans, would actually include about 4,000 camels. Can you imagine? I mean, it should be much bigger and more exciting than any freight train or something. 4,000 camels traveling for thousands of miles. How many people would get involved? How much trade would carry on in between them? How much cultural exchange would happen with that? I think it's really fascinating. And again, it is colorful. 13th century painting. This is a miniature. And it's all made with ancient pigments, and it remained the way it should have remained. But before then, because human beings loved color, and we don't, and I'm going to come to that because that's the most important part to me. They love nature, so there were lots of natural material in the nature to use as colorful beads, and it takes us to more archaeogemology. And this is an excavation that I attended in 2000, so it's been quite a long time, but this is one of the most interesting places I've been to. Urartian culture dates back to 4th millennium BC, and the culture loved beads. Every single tomb, not just important people, but ordinary people, were buried with thousands of beads. And whatever local material they could get hold of, carnelian, quartz, obsidian. I've seen amber that is basically brought from different localities. They used it, and they had different material like frit. It's basically a simple, basic ceramic that they used. But whatever they couldn't find in the color that they were looking for, they could actually imitate the color by using coloring agents. For example, cobalt use as a cobalt glass was a very common occurrence in those places. And if you look at the geology of the region, because this is in eastern Turkey, right in the border of Iran, a little bit of south and west of it is actually one of the main cobalt production, cassiterite and so on, mines. And there are ancient mines that are producing all sorts of metals to provide those pigments. So they were aware of it. And cobalt glass I saw in those findings, and believe me, I have never seen so many beads in my life. They're beautiful. They have not been eroded or anything like that. They were kept as what they were, and they are completely comparable to any beautiful cobalt color gemstone today you can see, and different tones. Another one. This is another culture that I really like and find it interesting, because we're all kind of geared up for ancient Egypt, but there was actually a neighboring kingdom next to ancient Egypt, much earlier, Nubians in Africa. And because they didn't have a written language, we don't know much about them. We only know about them through ancient Egypt writings. But what they did was, for some reason, they liked blue. And because they were in the middle of the desert and they didn't have much material, they learned how to glaze quartz from ancient Egypt, and they perfected the procedure. Now they ended up with these beautiful blue glazed quartz beads. There are statues that are carved out of quartz with blue glazing on them. So the beauty of this, again, they needed color for some reason. We don't know why needed, or they wanted to have that color. We don't know what the perception of that color for them. So that would always fascinated me. And then we have more and more colorful gems. This is another beautiful example. I'm obsessed by garnet, so you're going to see a lot of garnet photos here. This is a 3rd BC, it's a Celtic knot, actually. It's a diadem, and you have this beautiful red garnet because it was readily available, quite common, and ancients loved red garnet because it was carvable, it was beautiful. Today we have more of it, and look at those beautiful colors. All sorts of different garnets that we're looking at. These are actually, this one is a color shift Malaya garnet, and this is a demantoid that is green, which ancients were not that aware of. They had some green garnets, but grossularite, not this. And we have more and more different colors and garnets. Why? Because we are communicating again. We went obviously beyond the Silk Road. We now have internet. Everybody knows about different colors, different gemstones, and we basically communicate with each other. Even if we don't know about anything about it, you can actually Google it. I call it the Google University, not the most reliable source, but still we are aware of this because of the ability of communication that we have. And it's not enough. So whatever we have in nature, if it's because of supply and demand, we have to have even more of it. We have to make it better. That I call it, please don't take any offense on that, but arrogance of human nature. That we have to make it better for some reason in our understanding. So if the topaz they don't like is mined and cut, here we go, we have all these coated stones and sold as mystic topaz. With full disclosure, however, a second, third hand goes into it, and they all become natural all of a sudden. If your diamonds are not best quality, especially in smaller sizes, they get coated like that, and we end up with lots of colored diamonds, although in nature it's only 1 in 10,000 maybe carats when we go to natural colors. So these are colorful gems. We love color. Remember, it's not the diamond industry anymore. Colored gems are picking up a lot more in the last 2 decades. But how did this affect us? Because this is a study that, and this is not the best photo here because of the projection. You don't actually see the differences, but because cultural perceptions and value idea affects the color perception or the how we understand value related to color, we started seeing more and more what we call trying to get back to old days to describe color in gemology. And whatever culture is more dominant in terms of buying power became a little bit more effective on that decision. Take pigeon's blood. And pigeon's blood is a term that refers to beautiful ruby color in Chinese culture. Pigeon's blood might not sound anything as a quality factor to any Western speaking language. It doesn't matter if it's English, French, or whatever. However, because it set the criteria and labs started providing the lab reports as pigeon blood for everything that they think is high color or high quality ruby, we ended up with these terms that were used maybe 100, 150 years ago, but coming back to our modern day as only value factors, not decent color descriptions, but color value factors, so that the stone would sell better. Just like whatever beautiful emerald you see, you just call it Colombia instead of having to know that it is from Colombia or not. Same as blue sapphire. Cornflower is the best. Is there anybody here teaching gemology? I know some of you, but have you ever tried to teach what cornflower blue is to a non-English speaking person? The only thing they can think of is just those white stuff coming out of corn when it's cornflower. And it doesn't make sense because you have to explain that cornflower blue is actually cornflower is a wildflower and it is a beautiful blue and it's got a little bit of violet to it and so on. So, and then they say, so what's wrong with violetish blue? Logic, but color perception. So I want to show you this, why color perception affects us in gemology. This is a research in 2015, Stuart Robertson, who's here from Gemworld, actually ran. He basically collected data from market for 550 rubies in the most traded sizes. They're basically between 1 carat to 2.5 carat. 90% of which were described as pigeon's blood on lab reports. None of these are sold as pigeon's blood color perception by the dealer, but every single of them had a lab report that said it is pigeon's blood on the paper. Per carat price range, however, was from $450 to $50,000, effectively making the concept of pigeon's blood meaningless. I would love to have a $450 pigeon's blood ruby, especially if it's over 1 carat. Thank you very much. So, again, you see where I'm getting at? Our perception changes. And we're learning about other cultures' color perception, and then we're trying to apply it, and so on. So, let's get a little technical. So, what is color, then? I can tell you a little bit of scientific, bits and pieces, but I really didn't want this to be a science talk. In the whole energy realm, there are lots of wavelengths that we have for different energy levels and wavelengths and so on. Human eye is capable of seeing only this much. And within this, from roughly 400 nanometers up to 700 nanometers, we have what we call the rainbow colors, or the white color spectrum. Beyond or lower than 400 nanometers is ultraviolet light. We can't see it, however, we can see the effects of it. So when you have a fluorescent object, when it is subjected to ultraviolet light, you will see the fluorescence, therefore you're seeing the effect of it, but not ultraviolet light itself. Same applies to infrared, because it is basically beyond red after 700 nanometers. And this is all the human eye can perceive, and there are millions of color combinations that we can see. So, is it that simple? Is it something linear? No, color actually works in very, very complicated ways. And Mansell, who's an art teacher and an artist in early 1900s, wanted to deal with this problem, because when he was teaching art, especially color, he found the idea of color names misleading, because he realized that it was changing from one culture to another, from one person's color perception to another. So he wanted to change that and decided to give color codes and put them in such a space that it could be explained. You can actually pinpoint where your color is within that space and see that. By the way, color perception and color names from a very interesting point. There is no way of measuring what I see and what you see as red, for example. We're all looking at here as red, okay, this area, because we are all taught that is called red. But no way of measuring if it's the same red we are seeing. And beyond that, you will hear people, oh, I'm not very good with colors. You know, I stand to correct that, because we are not very good at naming colors, and it's a cultural thing. I will give you an anthropological example right now. What happens there that you might come from a culture that doesn't actually name that color as a color. There was a book published in beginning of 2000 and by anthropologists, and they claim that color is such an old concept, and it is in human perception, that it's one of the most universal. I love that word, universal, actually. That's, you know, we don't know what aliens do, but it's more global. I don't know if aliens actually perceive color the way we do, but it's more of a global approach to that. And they said that every culture could actually communicate through basic concepts, you know, like food, like basic needs, and color should be one of them. But in other studies, especially when anthropologists went out and worked with quite enclosed cultures that are not very much in touch with the rest of the world, they realized that certain cultures like that are entirely in a different world in terms of color. There is one particular area that, if you don't mind me reading, because I don't want to make a mistake. It's in upper banks of Amazon River. It's a tribe of 3,000 people in Peru, and the tribe is called Kandoshi. When the anthropologists went there and decided to do some color research with them and how they perceive color, they realized that there was not a single word for color in their language. Therefore, when anthropologists wanted to ask them what color they see in a colored patch or spot, they did not have the question of what is this color. So they had to ask the question, what it is like, or what do you see? And they realized those color patches or color swatches, whatever you want to call them, took different names by each types of member of the tribe, depending on where they were. So if they were put on a floor and it was a red swatch, color swatch, they would say it looked like blood. If it was in between greens, it looked like a ripe fruit. And this tribe provides and produces pigments nonstop. Everything they do is extract all sorts of different colors from nature and use in their textiles and paintings and pottery making and so on. Yet every single time they describe the color they use differently depending on where it is. But there isn't such a thing as color in that tribe. And that was very controversial, so it was disputed by the other anthropologists. And then it turns out that there were other tribes like that, for example, in Australia or some other remote places in the world that operated the exact same way. So that made me think about it, because when I think about my own language, Turkish, the word pink came later. And then I read an article recently that in, excuse me, in Old Hebrew and in Persian language, Farsi, and in Old Turkish, pink is actually rose. It looks like rose, therefore it is considered to be rose. When I think about old saying for blue sapphire is actually sky sapphire in Turkish. It literally is referred as sky sapphire. There's so many things. So when you think about all these, and we have it in English as well. It's not red, yellow, it is orange. And what is orange? It's a fruit. But if you look at older cultures that they didn't know anything about orange, say 1,000 years ago in northern, I don't know, Scandinavia, they have a different word for it because they didn't know anything about orange. So color perception changes with what we learn, and that's what's happening in gemology. That's where I'm coming to. So how can you resolve this whole color conundrum when you have such cultural clashes and understanding? And let me explain why Mansell explained things in codes, and then it became a little bit more complicated after. First, he explained the wheel. You know, this is a two-dimensional situation. You have rainbow colors, all divided in 10, basically 5 main colors is red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And then there are in between intermediate hues, as we call them. And then all of a sudden you have 10 colors. And then even those colors, the main hues, have different spaces. So he divided them into 4 spaces too. So in Mansell color wheel, we have basically 40 hues. But this is a two-dimensional explanation of it. And color is not two-dimensional. Color is a 3-dimensional concept. Here's what we have. Because color is controlled by tone and saturation. Color is controlled by tone and saturation, and how you explain it, he actually imagined a sphere, that you have a sphere, and think about it as the world or the globe, and you have your North Pole being the white, the lightest tone, and South Pole being black, the darkest tone. And if you actually put a shaft between, that's your gray line, because it will start from light gray towards all the dark gray all the way down to the South Pole, and it is your basically dark, from light to dark tone concept. That's how it is. And if you take this color wheel and put it at 90 degrees to that shaft, then you can create the sphere. Because then these colors will become the equator, and as you can see here, as you go towards the shaft in the middle, they get less saturated and gray, right at the center. But depending on what level of that sphere you are, you get either lighter or darker with the same hues. So if you Google Mansell color sphere, the very first one that is published in 1905, by the way, you can find a full book on Google Books. It's a fun read. nicely written, and there is a hand-printed sphere there that is a perfect sphere, like this one being the equator and the tonal graduation in the middle. However, right after that was published, it was quite a buzz and people really liked it. Color scientists and his students later on realized that human eye didn't work that way. Remember, it's in our DNA. We have different perception for color coming from different areas. They realized that we pick more details in red and orange in color compared to green and blue. So the sphere all of a sudden become some kind of a twisted three-dimensional object. But this is still called the Munsell color sphere because the variations change. And interestingly, certain hues get more saturated in lighter tones, and some others get more saturated in darker tones, so it is not about medium. So when they tell you, when they're teaching you gemology and say, okay, the medium colored stones are the most saturated, medium tone stones are the most saturated, therefore you give your color name like that, it doesn't work like that. Now, why did I say that some people are not good at naming a color? Because we all have different perceptions. I had students, they wanted to do color grading, and they said, but I'm a colorblind, I can't do it. Do you know that one of the best gemologists in the past in the United States was colorblind? In gemology, we're not just looking at it and naming it, we are comparing it. We all do it through comparison. And the comparison is the key, because when we were developing different color systems, and after the publication of World of Color System a few years back, the copies were sold and used in many different places, and schools that started teaching it, especially in Australia. And I had obviously been in touch with all these people teaching the classes, and one of them called me one day and said, look, I have 2 colorblind students trying to take the class. How is it going to work? I said, it's going to work. I want to hear the results. And it worked. Because they did not need to name the color. They just needed to compare it. As long as you can see the differences, again, there is no guarantee what I'm seeing is exactly the way you see it. And also, there is a scientific fact, and this is no comparison or anything like that, but it's a scientific fact that women are better than men to see the color differences. And this is, again, theorized as an anthropological fact that because women in the past were the gatherers, they had to separate poisonous fruit than the edible ones. And they had that perception literally ingrained into their eyes, that they could see the color differences between those species and fruits and so on. So that doesn't mean that men cannot understand or see color as much as women. In fact, it is trainable. Your eyes are so trainable. The more you look at color, the more you will learn about separating them. However, human brain doesn't have color memory. You do not remember what you see exactly, even 60 seconds later. Here is an example. You have this beautiful red sofa in your living room. You want matching cushions for it. There is no way you can take the sofa with you for shopping. You think that you are so sure that those red cushions you saw in the shop are the same color. You go and get those cushions. You put them together. You go like, no. And that's what it is. There is no color memory. The more you train yourself, you might actually get better at it, but it doesn't mean that you will remember everything. So it's all about comparison and human perception, our eyes' perception, and gemological perception becomes a little bit more complicated. So let's do this. Which stone you would buy, all the conditions are equal? Which one, if money wasn't an issue, let's put it that way, which one would you go for? Number 1, number 2, or number 3?
3.
3. Anybody goes for number 1? Can anybody tell me why you wouldn't go for number 1?
Not enough color.
Yeah. It's not something you like. And if I tell you that this is a nice blue sapphire, then you know your pick is even better. You like that color. So we're good. So blue sapphire, and we know that this is a nice, brilliant stone. Okay, let's try this one. Which one would you go for? These are nice. Number 1, number 2, or number 3? 3, okay. I don't hear number 2. Why would that be?
Not enough contrast.
Okay, again, let me do this though. Sri Lanka, Burma, Kashmir. Which one would you go for now?
What's in the name, right?
All right. Did your perception change?
No.
Because you know now where they come from and which one is more valuable. It wasn't just about color. So that's how our perception changes. If I told you these were all Burmese, you would love it. But now because they are not Burmese but Tanzanian, you say, oh, nice, yeah. That's why very small group of colleagues of mine, but because maybe we have the luxury of doing research than buying and selling, believe that the stones must be regarded by their own beautiful properties and features rather than where they come from. So how did we tackle with this problem? Of course, there are color comparison systems. I'm going to go through them very quickly. Pantone is actually created for the paint industry and printing industry, and it works perfectly fine because it's printing. You have those catalogs, you get them every year, pick it, and Pantone is very, very active in color world. Even there is a color of the year by Pantone every year, and we decide, or they decide, what fashion we should follow with that. I disagree, but, you know, it's a nice thing because it's all about selling color, and it's good. And there's Mansell, of course, because Mansell became a standard after its publication, and it's an international standard, by the way, and national standards of each country is for soil, for agriculture, for mineralogy, for describing color is out there. So Mansell has always been the main standard. So it was always been tried to be applied to gemology at a limited success. So, and when you do this with Mansell chips next to a faceted and transparent stone, it's very difficult because you're looking at transparent and three-dimensional environment that is creating a mosaic of colors, yet that's a flat printed surface. Yet we worked with this system for decades. And then there were other colleagues of ours that worked on this, and each and every of them achieved something really important for us. So there was Gem Dialogue, that it actually worked with transparencies. There was Color Scan. However, this was quite effective, but it was never commercially available. Afterwards, in the 1980s, maybe a few sets were produced. And then the Color Master. Does anybody remember Doctor Who? Is there anybody watching here, Doctor Who? Do you remember the dialects? They just remind me of that, again. It's quite an unpractical instrument to walk around with and get the color. Gem set, great, because it actually gives you that three-dimensional feel to it, but I come from a family that does a lot of plastic injection molding. My father was one of the pioneers in Turkey, and there's nothing that my father doesn't know about plastic injection and plastic chemistry and so on. And when I first saw those, I was so excited, and I started talking to him. He said, there's no consistency. You would be wasting your time. He said, it will work for a few years, but the moment the plastic or the coloring agent starts decaying, there won't be anything. Look at your gem sets, if you have it. I know most of us here, I own a set, I love it. But, and take it and compare it to another colleague of yours that live in an entirely different climate. And see if all the colors are the same. Gemawizard, electronic environment, two-dimensional flat backlit environment, and you cannot have the color consistency between two screens. And how are you going to actually compare something as a reflection from a screen? Anything electronic that way. And also, your gamut, color gamut on a computer screen is way outside of what you can see in gems, and some of them are actually not real colors. That is created in computer environment. World of Color, that's the system I worked for 5 years and still teach. I still teach this class. I love it. It's great for your non-faceted stones. Immediately you will find a color because it's based on Mansell. But beyond that, we added the International Color Science Committee color names that are not controversial to each and every page, based on Mansell again. So there are color names. So when you decide what color this is, and if your code is, let's say, what would that be? GY 315 or 10, it doesn't mean anything to anybody because your client is not going to like that code. Yet you can actually call it slightly yellowish green because it is written there. Again, there's nothing that you're picking and choosing and giving a name. It's all there. You find the color swatch, the name is there. You don't have to give it a name, so it makes it a really, really easy thing. Then the other one comes, and I'm really excited about that one. Oh, I want to mention this, by the way. There are lots of harmonization efforts by laboratories. I don't deny that. There's a lot. But it doesn't go as wide as it should be. Lotus is one of them. I really admire Dick Hughes's work. The beauty of it is that here we have the color names that they give, and they use those trade terms like the pigeon's blood and cornflower blue and peacock and so on, but they have images of them that at least you know what you're looking at for it. But what they do, they only provide services for ruby, sapphire, and spinel. So if I want to get a garnet graded, for example, I don't know what color name it would be. So there comes Color Codex, and this was basically work with Christopher Smith is the main, he is the developer of the program and the system, and I was basically consulting with him. And it comes very practical because it's created in an environment that it's basically reflects color, and it gives you that mosaic feel to it. So it's very practical and intuitive when you go through the color windows, which are created against real gemstones, not just by printing system or computer environment. They come out very, very realistic. So with this trade terms situation, maybe, and because Color Codex is all about codes, by the way, Chris was quite adamant about not giving any color names so that people can define their own color names. For example, if a lab wants to call it pigeon's blood, that's fine, but give codes so that we know what area we are. So here, some trade term issues. If I want to call this stone as pigeon's blood, and the lab report refers to Color Codex with the codes, and this is the area we're going to call the stone as pigeon's blood, everybody is clear about that. Or cornflower blue. But look, can you see how it is imitated in those windows, that how nicely it actually fits? So there are, and we are moving on. You know, we have the technology we can deal with, and this, if you want to call it an issue, it will be definitely resolved. So color is in our lives. We love it. Our perception might be different from one than to from one person to the other. However, the more we live in this world, the more colors we will see. I'm pretty sure of it. There's no guarantee of there will be no gem mines anymore. Tomorrow there might be another gem mine discovered, and a new color in a new species or a variety would come out, and we will all embrace that. So it's all great, and I wish you colorful days. But also just be aware of it that when you argue with people about color, be a little bit more understanding. And one more thing I'd like to add, and I'm going to ask Manfred's help with that because he is the expert in light, that the way we see color changes with the light source a lot, with our age and so on. And I'd like Manfred just to give us a 1-minute update on how and why we're getting into this debate in color, because the way we observe color through certain light sources are becoming more difficult. So Manfred will give us a much more scientific explanation of that.
Thank you very much. We are currently faced with a very severe situation with the light sources, which we call fluorescent lights, fluorescent lamps. I'm a manufacturer of luminaires, and as a manufacturer, I have to equip my luminaires with fluorescent lamps. But the fluorescent lamps fade away. Everything is now LED, and what happens is that most of the manufacturers of fluorescent lamps disappear. Even it's in Europe or even it's in China or wherever in the world, because you get killed by the LED. But the LED is something very new for gemology as a diffuse lighting device. LED is a very focused light source, and you remember in the old days when we had halogen pinpoint lamps, no one ever used them for illumination of plane surfaces or desktops. So we have the situation that as a manufacturer and presenter of luminaires, we have a lack of fluorescence. Number one, I ask you, check your lights, your luminaires, about the fluorescence inside, even if they are 10 years old or more. Go for replacement, because it might be the very last replacement you get in these days. Don't wait any longer. Next year at this time, I'm sure there are some wet eyes about not to get any longer fluorescence. But now we have the problem that the fluorescents are very early product and not ripe as the LEDs, sorry. Now we have the LEDs as a non-ripe product with everything covering every color, every rendering, every need. They are at the beginning of their career as a light source. So when we simply use a LED with a fair color rendering and with the color of light of our need, we will be surprised compared to what we got from the good old full spectrum fluorescent. And there's one term of it, it's called true light. Maybe some of you remember this. That was the end of the development of a very, very good color rendering, diffuse fluorescent lamp. Forget about it, it's not any longer available. So we are faced with a situation to find out what's available, what will be the future of the availability of good LED, and how to pack them. One LED is not enough, 2 is not enough, even 10 are not enough. So the engineering of a sufficient light source compared to the fluorescent lamps is open. And there's a lot of trial and errors on this, but for the color rendering world, even in our community, we need two kinds. One is for the white diamond, high refractive material. The other light we need is for the color stones, of less high index of refraction. So, as we know, the color stones need a color of light, not of 6,500 only, but we need the backup of red, of yellow, or whatever. This is not available now. even your old fluorescents changed their color rendering over the decades and don't have the color rendering of the original birth when they have been manufactured. So we are faced in a situation which is not very happy for everyone. And we have to wait and see what the future will bring us. Please pay your attention on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's Manfred Eichhorst, the producer and inventor of Eichhorst gemological instruments. So he's been in this business for 50 years and producing lights. I thought his words would have some weight for all of us. Any questions? Do we have time for questions?
I like the technology, but I don't have a question yet.
Oh, come on.
I'm not smart enough.
There you go. Come up with a question.
Educated.
No? Okay, no question.
There's a question over there.
Or there, yeah.
Check out this new microphone. We want to put it to use, right? Okay. My question is talking about light and gems is in reference to anisotropic gem. You shine pure light through them, reflect lots of colors. In your opinion, is an anisotropic gem more valuable than an isotropic gem? And can you speak to the fact, is it true that a ruby is isotropic and not anisotropic?
I'm lost
Okay.
because I don't know what those mean.
Okay.
Manfred, I don't know the meanings of those terms.
Anisotropic, when you shine pure light through gems, they radiate multiple colors, and some gems are
isotropic gems
Yes.
versus, okay, yes.
So, is it true that a ruby is an isotropic gem?
No, it is double refractive, but what you're saying is not about color. What you're saying is about a physical property. It's crystallographic feature. What happens there that when you have an isotropic gem, which means that the light goes into the stone and travels at the same, all in different directions at the same speed, you're going to see one type of color.
That's right.
When you see an isotropic gem, which could be, let's say, peridot, or tourmaline is a better example, that when the light goes in there, it's going to split into two rays because those rays will travel at different speeds, therefore you're going to see different colors. That's a physical property that you can observe with any light source. The light source is not going to change how the gem behaves. We're talking about the overall appearance of the gem, that is how it's observed. The color itself, because it's a spectrum situation, not the speed of light within the gemstone. Does that answer your question? Is there anybody? I have a lot of experienced gemologists in the room that can explain that. Gary? Rescue me.
The perception of color with perception as well. The perception of color with doubly refractive stone really, it's you're opening up Pandora's box basically because you have so much going on in an isotropic stone or in a let's say in a singly refractive stone where you're talking about a particular color and it's not going to change no matter which direction you look at the stone. There's no pleochroism, there's no variance in speed of light coming out of the stone. But now you have to add the cut of the stone. And so the angles will give you different mosaics in that stone. So you're looking at dark versus light and less saturation versus more saturation. And so you are seeing different color modifications, but you're basically seeing the same color. And that's just singly refractive stones. When you get into the doubly refractive stones, it's exponential in the variations that you're going to see of the colors based on the speed of light coming out of the stone in particular angles. So you're cutting the stone and you're seeing all these different variations of color, not just from the one color that's coming out of the stone, but now you've got a doubly refractive stone, you've got the possibility of seeing multiple colors coming out of the stone. It's much more than what we're talking about out here as to whether your perception of color is the same as my perception of color. And so that's what makes our industry so much fun, because you're looking at something that you're going to call pot paracha, and you see this beautiful pink-orange sunset in the stone, and I look at it and go, nah, that's 7:30 in the evening, and I want 6:30 in the evening. I want a little bit lighter. I want a little bit more pink, or that sort of thing. It's much more complicated, which makes all of the which makes Color Codex and Gem World's color guide. What's
World of Color.
Yes, World of Color, which makes those systems so much more valuable, because you don't have to place a particular name to it. You can look at it in three-dimensional space and sort of set a code to it. And then you can describe it however you want to, and I can describe it however I want to. But there's a particular code that we can send out to everybody that says that's what color it is.
Can I add?
Am I lost?
You are perfect. I just wanted to add something just to clarify. For example, if you're looking at both pleochroic and a color chain gem, like alexandrite, you're going to see the pleochroic colors still, but differently with different light sources, because you're seeing different colors with different light sources on a color chain gem, but the pleochroism is not going to be taken away from it or not adding anything to it. So you're looking at two entirely different concepts there.
And getting back to light sources, Manfred is really telling us that there's going to be a sea change here. That we really need to pay attention as to what kind of light sources we're using, because we're so used to talking about a color change between fluorescent light and incandescent light, and we won't have access to that anymore.
Yeah.
And who was it that was speaking the other day that said, it was at the GILC, and it was Billy Hughes, who said, we have all this lighting in our laboratory to describe color, and yet when I purchase a stone and I have access to all of this lighting, I go to the window.
That's what I do. Every time I test anything, I end up with going by the window. And once we actually dodged a bullet just by doing that, literally. Because a group of people sent some stones, claimed that they were paparachas. I did my test. Yes, they were unheated, nice sapphires and beautiful paparacha colors, majority of them. But my gemological instincts kicked again, and I went by the window, and they were all green. So the reaction was, whoever was in the middle negotiating with that group didn't like it, and they said that, oh, she is good. Like, it's not about being good, it's about knowing that the gems will look differently under different light conditions, and you should never fail for that. That's how I look at it. Any more questions?
1, 2, 3. There we go. The color codex, does it use plastic?
Nope.
Nope. What is it? How do you render the color?
It's a certain, it is a proprietary structure. It is a particular structure that's not revealed. I strongly recommend for you to go and talk to Chris in person. However, it's as long as you have the page and the stone with you, and you're in a well-lit area that is not diffuse light or too dark, you're going to pick the color of the gemstone, because you're looking at the overall appearance of it with all the mosaic effects and so on immediately. But it's not print, it's not, there are no filters or anything like that you need to use. Oh, no, he hasn't seen it. I approve. There's no plastic in mold either, so I didn't ask his opinion. Okay, I guess. Fine, thank you.